What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected actors walks onto a late-night stage expecting a conversation and instead gets ambushed by a host more interested in controversy than respect? In just 37 seconds, a single comment would shatter the illusion of late-night civility and expose the entitled arrogance of a man who forgot he was sitting across from a legend who refuses to be disrespected. The audience was buzzing with excitement as Samuel L. Jackson made his entrance. The applause was thunderous, the kind reserved for true icons. He walked out with that signature confidence, waving to the crowd, his presence commanding the room in a way few people can. This was supposed to be a routine appearance, a chance to promote his latest project, share some laughs, and give the audience a glimpse into the life of one of cinema's greatest talents. Jimmy Kimmel stood up from behind his desk, that familiar grin plastered across his face as he shook Samuel's hand. The two men sat down, the audience settled, and the interview began like any other. Small talk about the weather, a joke about Los Angeles traffic, the usual warm-up banter that opens every late-night show. Samuel was relaxed, leaning back in his chair, ready for what he thought would be a pleasant conversation. "So, Samuel, thanks for being here tonight," Jimmy started, his tone friendly enough. "You've got this new movie coming out, and I've got to say, I'm excited to talk about it." "Appreciate that, man," Samuel replied, nodding. "Yeah, we worked really hard on this one. It's a project that means a lot to me." The first few minutes proceeded smoothly. They discussed the film's premise, the director's vision, the challenging shoot locations. Samuel told a funny story about a scene that took 23 takes because a dog wouldn't stop barking in the background. The audience laughed. Everything seemed normal, but anyone paying close attention might have noticed something shifting in Jimmy's demeanor, a restlessness, like he was waiting for the right moment to pivot the conversation somewhere else. "You know, Samuel," Jimmy said, leaning forward slightly, "I've always wondered something about you. You've been in, over 150 movies at this point?" "Something like that," Samuel confirmed, still smiling. Right. "So here's what I'm curious about. Do you ever feel like, and I'm just being honest here, do you ever feel like you're just playing the same character over and over again? Like angry guy with a gun, angry guy without a gun, slightly less angry guy who still ends up yelling?" The audience let out an uncomfortable laugh, that nervous kind of laughter that happens when someone crosses a line but tries to pass it off as a joke. Samuel's smile faded slightly. He sat up straighter in his chair. "I'm sorry, what?" Samuel asked, his voice even but with an edge to it. "Oh, come on, you know what I mean," Jimmy continued, waving his hand, dismissively. "It's not a criticism, it's just an observation. You've got your thing, your brand. Everybody knows what they're getting when Samuel L. Jackson shows up on screen. It's predictable, but hey, predictable pays the bills, right?" There was a pause, a long, heavy pause, the kind of silence that makes everyone in the room realize something has gone terribly wrong. Samuel stared at Jimmy with an expression that was hard to read, but definitely wasn't amused. "Predictable?" Samuel repeated slowly, letting the word hang in the air. "That's an interesting word choice." "I mean, yeah," Jimmy pressed on, seemingly oblivious to the tension he'd created. "Don't get me wrong, you're good at what you do, but it's not exactly challenging yourself, is it? When was the last time you really stretched as an actor? Played something vulnerable, something different?" The audience had gone completely quiet now. Even the crew members standing off to the side were exchanging worried glances. This wasn't playful ribbing between friends. This was a host attacking his guest on live television. Samuel leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Let me ask you something, Jimmy. Have you actually watched any of my films? I'm talking about really watched them, not just caught them on cable while you were scrolling through your phone." "Of course I have," Jimmy said defensively. "I wouldn't have you on the show if I wasn't familiar with your work." "Really? Because what you just described tells me you haven't paid attention to a single thing I've done in the last 30 years. You think every character I play is the same? You think there's no difference between the choices I make in one role versus another? That's either ignorance or disrespect, and I'm trying to figure out which one it is." Jimmy shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He tried to laugh it off, looking to the audience for support, but the crowd wasn't giving him any. They were on Samuel's side, and it showed. "Hey, I'm just trying to have an honest conversation here," Jimmy said, his tone becoming slightly defensive. "Isn't that what these interviews are supposed to be about? Real talk?" "Real talk?" Samuel's voice was calm, but there was fire behind it. "Real talk is one thing. What you're doing is trying to get a viral moment by being disrespectful to someone who came here in good faith. There's a difference. Oh, come on. You're being too sensitive, Jimmy said. And the second those words left his mouth, everyone knew he'd made a massive mistake. Samuel's jaw tightened. Too sensitive. So now you're going to sit there and tell me how I should feel about being insulted on your show. I wasn't insulting you, Jimmy protested, but his voice lacked conviction. I was just making a point about your career choices. My career choices, Samuel said, his voice rising slightly. Let's talk about career choices. I've worked with Spike Lee, Quentin Tarantino, Steven Spielberg. I've done Shakespeare on stage. I've played heroes, villains, everything in between. I've pushed myself in ways you clearly haven't bothered to notice or care about. But you want to sit here and reduce all of that to some tired stereotype because you think it makes for good television. The tension in the studio was suffocating. Jimmy was clearly trying to figure out how to salvage the situation, but he kept making it worse. Look, Samuel, I think you're taking this way too personally. It was just a joke. Can't we just move on and talk about the movie? A joke, Samuel repeated. See, that's the problem with people like you. You think you can say whatever you want, and if someone calls you out on it, you just claim it was a joke. That's not how respect works. That's not how any of this works. Jimmy's face was reddening now. Whether from embarrassment or frustration, it was hard to tell. People like me? What's that supposed to mean? It means hosts who forget that the people sitting in that chair are guests. Guests who took time out of their day to come on your show, to help your ratings, to give your audience something worth watching. And instead of treating them with basic human decency, you decide to take cheap shots because you think it makes you look clever. That's not fair, Jimmy shot back, his voice taking on a harder edge. I've had hundreds of guests on this show, and nobody's ever had a problem with my interview style before. Maybe they were just too polite to say anything, Samuel countered. Or maybe they didn't want to make waves because they knew they'd be the ones who'd get blamed for ruining the show. But I'm not going to sit here and smile while you disrespect my work, my career, and my choices. Jimmy threw his hands up in exasperation. This is ridiculous. You're completely overreacting to what was meant as light commentary. Light commentary, Samuel said, shaking his head. You want to know what light commentary is? Light commentary is asking about my favorite scene in the movie. Light commentary is talking about what it was like working with the director. What you did was dismissive, condescending, and completely unprofessional. The audience was completely silent, watching this confrontation unfold like spectators at a tennis match. Some people had their phones out, clearly recording what was happening. Others just sat there with their mouths open, unable to believe what they were witnessing. Jimmy tried a different approach. Okay, you know what? Maybe I could have phrased things better. But you've got to admit, you're being pretty hostile right now. Hostile? Samuel's voice was incredulous. You attack my entire body of work on live television, and when I defend myself, I'm the one being hostile? Do you hear yourself right now? I didn't attack anything, Jimmy insisted, but he was clearly losing control of the conversation. I asked a question. Since when is asking questions an attack? It's the way you asked it. It's the assumption behind it. It's the fact that you clearly didn't do your homework before I came out here, and now you're trying to cover for your laziness by making me out to be the problem. Jimmy stood up from his desk, pointing at Samuel. You know what? I don't have to sit here and be lectured by you. This is my show. I've been doing this for years, and I don't need you telling me how to do my job. The audience gasped. Several people shouted in disapproval. Samuel slowly rose from his chair, towering over the desk. And I don't need to sit here and be disrespected by someone who thinks having a late-night show makes him untouchable. You want to talk about doing your job? Your job is to make your guests feel welcome, to have meaningful conversations, to give people a reason to tune in. All you've done tonight is prove that you care more about manufactured drama than actual substance. Then maybe you should leave, Jimmy said, his voice cold. If you're so offended by everything, maybe this isn't the right place for you. The words hung in the air like a challenge. The audience was in shock. Some people were booing now, not at Samuel, but at Jimmy. The host had completely lost the room. Samuel nodded slowly, a bitter smile crossing his face. You know what? You're absolutely right. This isn't the right place for me, because I actually have standards. He reached up and unclipped his microphone, letting it drop onto the chair. The sound echoed through the studio. I came here tonight thinking I was going to have a conversation with a professional, Instead, I got ambushed by someone who confused arrogance with entertainment. That's on me for not doing my homework about what kind of show this has become. Oh, that's rich. Jimmy snapped back. You're going to lecture me about professionalism while you storm off my set? I'm not storming anywhere, Samuel said calmly. I'm making a choice, the same way I make choices. In every role I take, every project I commit to, I choose not to be somewhere I'm not respected. And right now, there's zero respect in this room for what I do or who I am as an artist. The band, which had been sitting quietly throughout the entire exchange, didn't know whether to play or stay silent. The audience was on their feet now, some applauding Samuel, others just standing in stunned disbelief. Jimmy's face was bright red. You think you're some kind of hero for walking out? You're just proving that you can't handle any kind of real conversation. Real conversation? Samuel laughed. But there was no humor in it. Man, you wouldn't know a real conversation if it hit you in the face. A real conversation requires two people who respect each other. What you wanted was a punching bag, someone you could take shots at for laughs. Well, congratulations, you got your moment. I hope it was worth it. Security? Jimmy called out, his voice shaking with anger. We need security out. Here now. Two large men in suits emerged from backstage, looking uncertain about what exactly they were supposed to do. Samuel looked at them, then back at Jimmy. Security? Really? That's how you're going to play this? I'm leaving on my own, man. You don't need to have me escorted out like I'm some kind of threat. Just go, Jimmy said through gritted teeth. Get out of my studio. Samuel turned to face the audience one last time. I apologize to all of you who came here tonight expecting a good show. You deserve better than this. You deserved an interview that was actually about the work, about the craft, about something meaningful. Instead, you got whatever this was. The audience erupted in applause. People were standing, cheering, showing their support for Samuel. It was clear whose side they were on. Jimmy stood behind his desk, arms crossed, glaring at Samuel. Are you done with your little speech? Yeah, I'm done, Samuel said. I'm done being disrespected. I'm done watching you try to turn this into something it shouldn't be. And I'm definitely done with this show. He walked toward the exit, his stride confident and unhurried. The security guards followed at a distance, unsure of their role in all this. The audience continued to cheer, some people calling out words of encouragement and support. As Samuel reached the edge of the stage, Jimmy couldn't resist getting in one last jab. Don't let the door hit you on the way out, Samuel. I'm sure you'll find plenty of other predictable roles to keep you busy. Samuel stopped. He turned around slowly, looking back at Jimmy with an expression of pure disappointment. You know what the saddest part of all this is? Samuel called out across the studio. You actually think you won something here tonight. You think this moment makes you look strong, makes you look like you can't be pushed around. But everyone in this room, everyone watching at home, they all see the truth. They see a small man who got scared when his guest stood up for himself. They see someone who confused being mean with being funny, confused being provocative with being interesting. Get out, Jimmy shouted, his composure completely shattered. I'm going, Samuel replied. But let me leave you with this. When people talk about this moment tomorrow, and they will talk about it, they're not going to be discussing how brave you were or how edgy your questions were. They're going to be talking about the night Jimmy Kimmel disrespected Samuel L. Jackson and got exactly what he deserved. They're going to be talking about the night a host forgot that respect is a two-way street. With that, Samuel L. Jackson walked off the stage, through the backstage area, and out of the building. The audience was still on their feet, still applauding, still showing their support for a man who refused to be diminished. Back on stage, Jimmy stood alone, the silence now deafening despite the crowd's noise. His producers were frantically trying to figure out how to salvage the rest of the show. The band awkwardly started playing, trying to transition to a commercial break, but the damage was done. The cameras kept rolling for a few more seconds, capturing Jimmy's face as the reality of what had just happened began to sink in. His expression was a mixture of anger, embarrassment, and something that might have been regret, though it was hard to tell. In the green room backstage, Samuel gathered his belongings while members of the crew approached him, some apologizing for what had happened, others thanking him for standing up for himself. One young production assistant, barely in her 20s, came up to him with tears in her eyes. Mr. Jackson, I just wanted to say thank you. Thank you for not letting him get away with that. I've seen him treat other guests badly before, but nobody ever says anything. You're the first person who actually called him out." Samuel gave her a kind smile. "You should never let anyone make you feel small, especially not someone who's supposed to be building you up. That goes for guests on a talk show, and it goes for people working behind the scenes too." As word spread about what had happened, social media exploded with reactions. People who had been watching live were posting clips, sharing their thoughts, taking sides. The overwhelming majority supported Samuel, praising him for his dignity and his refusal to accept disrespect. Many pointed out that Jimmy had a history of making uncomfortable jokes at his guests' expense, and that this confrontation was long overdue. The stage manager approached Samuel cautiously. "Mr. Jackson, I'm so sorry about all this. This isn't how things were supposed to go tonight." "I know it's not your fault," Samuel said, packing the last of his things. "But somebody needs to have a serious talk with your host about how he treats people, because what happened out there? That was completely unacceptable." Back on the main stage, Jimmy was trying to continue the show, but his heart clearly wasn't in it. He stumbled through his monologue, made awkward transitions, and seemed unable to focus. The audience, still buzzing from what they'd witnessed, wasn't giving him their usual energy. They'd seen behind the curtain, seen the kind of person he could be when things didn't go his way, and it had changed their perception entirely. One of the other producers pulled Jimmy aside during another commercial break. "That was a disaster. Do you realize what you've done? Samuel L. Jackson is one of the most beloved actors in the world, and you just kicked him off the show on live television." "He was the one being difficult," Jimmy protested weakly. "He couldn't take a joke." "A joke? Jimmy, you insulted his entire career. You called his work predictable. You told him he wasn't challenging himself. That wasn't a joke, that was an attack. And then when he defended himself, you escalated instead of backing down. This is going to follow you for a long time." Jimmy ran his hands through his hair, the weight of his actions starting to become clear. "I was just trying to make the interview interesting. I was trying to push him a little, get some real reactions." "Well, you got real reactions," the producer said. "And now we're going to spend the next few weeks dealing with the fallout. The network is already getting calls. This is bad, Jimmy. This is really bad." In the parking garage, Samuel sat in his car for a moment before starting the engine. He took a deep breath, letting the adrenaline of the confrontation begin to fade. His phone was already blowing up with messages from friends, colleagues, and representatives asking if he was okay, if what they were hearing was true, if he needed anything. He sent out a simple text to his closest friends. "I'm fine. Sometimes you have to stand up for yourself, even when it's uncomfortable, especially when it's uncomfortable." As he drove away from the studio, Samuel thought about all the times he'd sat through uncomfortable interviews. All the times hosts had made jokes at his expense that he'd laughed off to keep things moving. He thought about the younger actors who looked up to him, who might face similar situations in their own careers, and he felt good about what he'd done tonight. Not happy about the confrontation itself, but satisfied that he hadn't let the moment pass without saying something. The streets of Los Angeles were quiet as he made his way home. The city lights blurred past his windows, and he turned on some music, something calm to help him unwind. Tomorrow, he knew, would be chaos. There would be headlines, think pieces, debates about who was right and who was wrong. But tonight, driving through the city, he felt at peace with his decision. Back at the studio, the show finally wrapped. The audience filed out, many of them still talking animatedly about what they'd witnessed. Some were already posting their own videos and photos, their own accounts of being present for this historic moment in late-night television history. Jimmy retreated to his office, shutting the door behind him. His staff gave him space, knowing that he needed time to process everything. Through the door, they could hear him making phone calls, his voice alternating between defensive and apologetic depending on who he was talking to. The makeup artist who had worked with Samuel earlier in the evening shook her head as she cleaned up her station. "I've been working in this business for 25 years, she said to a colleague, "and I've never seen anything like that. But I'll tell you what, Samuel Jackson was right. There's a way to conduct yourself, a way to treat people, and what happened out there tonight was way out of line." The band leader, who had watched the entire confrontation from his position on stage, gathered his musicians. "Well," he said with a heavy sigh, "that's going to be one for the history books. Let's hope we never have to witness something like that again." As the crew began breaking down the set for the night, everyone was talking about the same thing. Not about the jokes that had landed, not about the other segments that had gone well, but about those intense minutes when a guest had stood up for himself and walked away rather than accept disrespect. One of the camera operators, a veteran of the industry who had filmed thousands of interviews over his career, summed it up perfectly. You could feel it in the room. The second Jimmy made that crack about predictable, you could feel the whole energy shift. Samuel gave him a chance to walk it back, to turn it into something else, but Jimmy just kept pushing. And once you disrespect someone like that, someone with that much dignity and self-respect, there's no coming back from it. The interview was over the moment those words left his mouth. Everything after that was just watching it fall apart in real time. In living rooms and bars across the country, people who had tuned in to watch what they thought would be a standard late-night interview were now witnesses to something far more significant. They'd seen an actor at the peak of his career refuse to be diminished. They'd seen a host let his ego and his desire for a viral moment override his basic responsibility to treat guests with respect. And they'd seen the natural consequences of that choice play out in real time. The incident would be analyzed and discussed for weeks to come. Media critics would write columns about the changing dynamics of celebrity interviews, about the fine line between challenging questions and disrespectful provocation, about what guests owe to hosts and what hosts owe to guests. But beneath all the analysis and commentary, the core truth remains simple and undeniable. Samuel L. Jackson had come to that studio to talk about his work, to connect with an audience, to be part of the entertainment landscape he'd contributed to for decades. Instead, he'd been met with dismissiveness and condescension. And rather than accept that treatment, rather than smile through it for the sake of appearances, he had done something that felt increasingly rare in modern celebrity culture. He had demanded respect, and when that respect wasn't forthcoming, he had walked away.